Hi there, thank you for joining. It's Ray with Tarot Living. So today we are going to look at tarot lesson number 3 in our series of 8 tarot lessons that we're doing until the end of 2015. So if you haven't already, please go back to tarot lesson number 1 and 2, especially if you wanted to take a look at tarot lesson number 2, which kind of is a precursor or preamble of this particular lesson. So today tarot lesson number 3 is actually placement of cards. So in tarot lesson number 2, we talked about elemental dignities and how depending on where a card sits in terms of an element next to it, is that strengthened or is it weakened? For this lesson, we're actually going to expand on that a little bit. Similar idea, but we're going to take a look at all of the ways, or not all of the ways, but some of the ways in which a card is strengthened or weakened depending on the placement within a reading. So that could be related to an element, but it can be related to other things as well. So today we're actually going to take a look at card placement and how that can affect, or even card reversal, how that can affect. We're going to just be touching on a little bit of each of those things. So I hope you enjoy this lesson. Right, so we are going to go through a variety of different examples of how card placement or the way in which a card is turning up in a reading may have an impact on that card. And in particular, what we're actually going to talk about today mostly is how cards are strengthened by being in a particular position. So one of the most common ways, and I'm going to show you several examples, and this is going to probably go relatively quickly because I have so many examples this evening to post. So the first example I want to talk about is when a card shows up in an outcome or final position or a future position in a reading, in a card spread, and there are certain cards that show up that lend themselves very well to being an outcome in and of themselves. So I've given a few examples here. So the Six of Wands in this example, Ten of Pentacles, and the World card. This is the Anna K Tarot, but I'll put the names below because I know you can't actually read all of them because of the crystal in front of it. So many different spreads, the majority, I'm not going to say the majority, but many different spreads do have some type of outcome or final position. Not all of them, but many of them. So if you do have a spread or you're working with a spread for a client that does have an outcome or final position, and you pull one of these cards, and I'm going to show you several other examples shortly, you know that that card is really in a very strong position because it is showing you a final outcome. It's showing you almost a point of completion, or it's showing you the final step in something, and it in itself is telling you that there is a completion to it. Six of Wands, sort of 3 times 2. So every point of 3, in numerology is sort of a level of completion. So Six of Wands, 6 being a certain level of completion. And then, of course, Six of Wands really lends itself to being a card that celebrates the victory in a very positive way. So that card in an outcome position or a final position would be extremely strong in that position. I'm actually going to get my magic wand because that will be better. And then the Ten of Pentacles is another example. So Ten of Pentacles is a great card in a final position. So in fact, any 10. So if you are having a 10 that shows up, it's really saying that you have reached a final point of some type of cycle. Now, in the Swords and the Wands, the 10s are more challenging, obviously, and difficult because those suits are the masculine suits, and they're more full of, a little bit more strife than the Cups and the Pentacles. Cups and Pentacles tend to show kind of a positive outcome for the 10. But in any event, so I've left the Ten of Pentacles here as an example, and Ten of Pentacles is a great example of an outcome card where you not only have the 10 showing, but we have Pentacles, which is really kind of it's a positive card of some financial, completion, success, family environment, kind of a traditional family lineage environment that has success to it. So that's a great card to find in a outcome position as well. And like I say, really any 10, if you're seeing a 10, then you're seeing a final point of a cycle. And so a new cycle is going to be starting right away. And like I say, in particular, the Ten of Cups and the Ten of Pentacles. This is the World card in the Anna K Tarot, and the World card is also a card that just intrinsically in itself shows you a point of completion. So it's all about really putting in effort. It is ruled by Saturn, and it means putting in effort over a period of time and seeing success and outcome of those efforts on a physical level, on a tangible sort of, our physical material world. And it can also sort of have more of a spiritual connotation to it, even though it's in the house of Capricorn, particularly if it's sitting with some other cards. But this card really shows a point of completion, and so this card, it would be excellent as well if you do see it in a final outcome position. What I would consider that card to be is very well dignified, as we've talked about in our other videos. It would be strengthened. It is in a very strong position. Sometimes I call it almost exalted. It's in a very good position. So let's look at a couple of other examples now. Okay, so this is actually a totally different deck, and I'm going to be doing a review on this deck shortly. So this is King's Journey deck, and it's actually the new version of King's Journey Tarot. So let's start over here. This is the Sun card in King's Journey Tarot, and I think you can see that well enough, so I won't move anything. So again, if you see the Sun card that's in an outcome or a final position, you know that that's really putting a positive and optimistic, outlook on the the outcome or the where the reading is going or what the answer to the question is. It also shows kind of a level of reaching a point where you've really come into your own, and you have confidence and there's positivity, and so it's just a naturally intrinsically strong card to pull if you actually have pulled it for the outcome. So that is a great example as well. Here is the Ten of Cups in this particular deck. So the Ten of Cups, we talked about that just briefly when we were looking at the Ten of Pentacles. Ten of Cups again shows happiness, a family environment, connections, with loved ones. It shows just really positivity, that things are really going well and that you have abundance and that you have a lot of things that have come together for you, and there's great emotional satisfaction. So that again is a very strong card to have in an outcome position, and I'm sure you're getting sort of the picture of this. So here's the Wheel card, or the Wheel of Fortune in some decks. These cards actually aren't labeled, which is interesting. When I do my review, I'll talk about that in great detail. But I do know these cards. So that's the Wheel of Fortune, or the wheel. And this is again a 10. So it's a 10 in the major arcana, and it does connect with the 10 in the minors. And it shows really a level of completion of some point, and that it's phasal and cycles. So probably one cycle is completing and another one will begin shortly. So again, very strong position if it's in an outcome point of a reading. So I hope that helps in terms of understanding some of the strengths, the cards that would be very strengthened or do very well or well dignified in those outcome or final positions. So let's look at some other ones. But let's take a look at something completely different. So cards that are only positive in positive positions aren't the only cards that are strengthened. Because really what we're talking about here is whether something is strengthened or well dignified in the sense of its meaning. Okay, so that's the whole key to what we're talking about. Is the card in its purest meaning within a reading when it comes up? So cards that come up that are difficult, challenging cards, so here we've got two, we've got the Devil card and we've got the Three of Swords. So we know that these cards are challenging. So let's take a look at what happens when a reading has some point in the reading, or one of the positions of the reading is actually about the challenges that the client needs to overcome or face, or the obstacles that they're needing to deal with. Or they're asking, the position of the card is asking, what is holding the client back? Or what are the difficult influences? Okay, so if we end up with a reading where we have situation, challenge, and then outcome. So let's focus on the challenge point. Okay, so the middle card that would be in that reading is the challenge position. So what are they challenged with? So if they pull a card such as these two, and I'll show you several more, we know that this reading is actually showing us very clearly that they are challenged and that this card is actually in a very strong position. Strong doesn't necessarily mean negative or positive. Strong in the sense of what we're talking about is whether it's in its purest form, whether it's telling us a pure energy about that card. And if these cards come up in the challenge position, I would say that's a very strong position to be in. And so that message to that client will be really quite pointed and very strong. So we have the Devil card here and the Three of Swords. So let's do the Three of Swords first. So Three of Swords is one of the cards within the sword series, and so the Three of Swords tends to be a card that shows some separation, some difficulty, some strife with individuals, some kind of pain or anguish that has been caused potentially with difficult communication, difficult relationships. And really it's pain that can be felt within the heart and can be felt on a very deep level and can cause an individual quite a bit of anguish. So if that comes up in the challenge position, it's really about how can I overcome the pain and difficulty that I have experienced. How can I look toward what needs to be dealt with here? And usually there's some kind of healing that needs to be dealt with here. But that's the challenge, and that would be a very strong position for that card to be in. If it's the Devil card, then we know that the Devil card is really saying, what is it that you are physically attaching yourself to or mentally attaching yourself to that is holding you back from being everything that you want to be? And I could go on about the Devil meaning, and I have done so in other videos, but we shall not do that today because that's not the point. So if either of these two cards come up in a challenge position, we know that they are in a very strong position, and that message is going to be very clear to that client. Let's look at some more. All right, so here are a couple more examples. So in this example, we've got the Nine of Swords, and this is King's Journey Tarot, Nine of Swords and Five of Cups. So again, if that comes up in a challenge position, then we know that the challenge for this individual is to really overcome, their personal anxieties and their personal difficulties seen in the Nine of Swords. Trying to really believe in oneself and not, sort of get overly, bogged down by our mental workings, I guess you could say. And the Five of Cups is certainly the challenge is really to overcome some of the grief or difficulty or despair that we sometimes feel and sometimes go through, and learning how to work through that the best that we can in order to move forward. So those are some obvious ones in a challenge position. Again, very strong if they end up in that position. And when I say strong, I mean that they are strengthened to their greatest degree. Here's another one, Five of Pentacles, for example. They have a very different Five of Pentacles, but the Five of Pentacles, again, that's a challenge position and something that would be very clear in terms of what needs to be overcome in that situation. So there are some great examples of, if you find a reading with a spread position that has what are the obstacles, what are the challenges, what does the client need to overcome or learn, for example. And any of these cards pulled, I would consider them to be in a very strengthened position in the sense of moving toward the purest form of their meaning. So I hope that helps with difficult positions. Now let's move on to something else. All right, let's look at something a little bit different. Now, I love this one in particular. I find that it says so much about how the person should approach the situation or what kind of timing is going to be on the situation at hand. So sometimes in a reading you may have positions within the spread where it says how should the client deal with it? What should their approach be? Or even just what will the timing be on something. And it may not be an actual position within a spread, but I often get these cards come up when someone is wanting to know what should they do in a situation. And I just wanted to point out that if you have a reading where you are asking how should they approach it, or what's the best piece of advice, or what would their next steps be, those kinds of readings or sections of the readings. If you come up with the various cards that I'm going to show you now, it can really tell you about how they should move forward with the situation. So here is a classic one where we've got a Seven of Pentacles and Knight of Pentacles, and they actually have some similarities to them, which is why I put them up first together. So Seven of Pentacles is Saturn in Taurus, and it's really all about having the diligence and patience to work very hard at something and not necessarily seeing those rewards or that harvest right away, and really needing to stay with it and even evaluate, you know, what am I doing here and what do I need to do next in order to actually reap the rewards down the road. It's a card that will typically show you that something is not going to be coming to fruition right now. Knight of Pentacles, similarly, he is the knight who is the most inactive, shall we say. He's usually sitting on the darker horse that is, you know, stagnant. He's, you know, the horse isn't moving. It shows that he's quite stationary, and he actually rules Virgo. And he's very practical, more methodical. He does things slowly with intention. He's not going to rush in like the Knight of Swords or the Knight of Wands. You know, he takes his time to do things, and he'll do it well if he's going to do it. So both of these cards have a very similar meaning, and they really will show if this is coming up, what's the best piece of advice or what's the timing on something. It really is showing us that something is going to be slower, it's going to be more methodical, it's going to happen over a period of time, and you're not going to necessarily see the fruits of everything right away. So if you have these cards come up in those positions, it's really a very, very clear message, you know, that something is not going to be, you know, coming to great success right away here. You know, that there's some patience that may be required in that situation. So let's look at some other examples. All right, so here are a couple of other examples of, you know, how something is going to unfold. So we've got the first one is the Hanged Man, and the second one is the Four of Swords. And this is the Anna K Tarot. So both of these cards really tell you that action and activity and moving forward very quickly is not going to happen at this time. So the Hanged Man will typically mean that you know, you are taking time to pause and that you need to reflect for some reason, and that there is not, or you just can't, you know, sort of get the energy up to actually do something at this time. You're feeling like you're in a stagnant position right now, and you know, you're just not able to move forward at this particular time, and you kind of have to surrender to certain things in order to learn and grow, and then you'll be able to move on. It can also just mean that there's just not a lot of energy for that activity right at this time. And the Four of Swords is really about a period of recuperation. You have to remember that Three of Swords comes right before it, and that was really a period of you know, angst and difficulty and stress and some you know, pain and sorrow and separation. And so this is really a healing phase. So both of these cards really tell us that things are not moving forward right at this time. We're actually going to be in a stayed, you know, type of position at this point. We're not moving forward right at this moment. So that's going to tell you something about how things are going in terms of unfolding. All right, so here's a couple more that would be completely opposite from that. So if you pulled the Knight of Swords or the Eight of Wands, then these cards are going to mean really the opposite of that. So Eight of Wands, let's look at first. Eight of Wands is a card that it's actually Mercury in Sagittarius, and it is a card that really is looking forward in terms of aiming and optimism and energy and really moving ahead. And you can certainly speed ahead and move ahead quite quickly if you're pulling that card about timing, or, you know, what is the next step, or how should I do something. You know, it really says that things can move ahead quite quickly. There may be some warnings in that, and you'd have to look at all of the other cards around. I mean, sometimes it can mean that you're rushing in too much, but, you know, let's just take it for what it is for right now, just showing you the differences between the previous cards. So Eight of Wands really has a lot of energy, a lot of quick energy, and it can also mean that some information is going to come to you that will be helpful to you, or that will give you information in order to potentially, you know, move something forward. Knight of Swords, he is a guy who's, you know, really not still for very long. He is ruled by Gemini, and he is very active, and his mind is very active, and he wants to do things very quickly, and he wants to move ahead quickly. So he's not going to, you know, sit around waiting, sort of thing. So if they're wondering how something is going to unfold, these cards would show that something is going to be very quick. Of course, there's always the warning of potentially rushing in, or, think before you leap and that sort of thing. But I mean, again, you'd have to look at all of the other cards around it. So I hope that helps in terms of recognizing that there's several cards within the tarot deck that really show us about timing, or how things will unfold, how something is going to move forward, or what they need to know in terms of going to the next step. So those are some things about how it's going to kind of unfold. So let's look at something different now. All right, another area you often see in tarot that is really important and crucial. You'll often see in readings, or if you just happen to get a couple of cards that mean the same thing, you'll be able to identify it, and that is of transition. So cards that show transition and cards that show change. There's a few in the major arcana, and then of course there's several in the minor, and we're going to talk about a few of those. So the first one actually I want to talk about is the Death card. And so these are a couple of the majors. So I mean, certainly the Death card, which is ruled by Scorpio, is a card that notoriously means that you are going through some type of change and transition, and that through that transition you will be changed, and you will move through it and come out at the other side in a different way, in some kind of different form potentially. How you probably will have grown or developed in some way. So that's certainly a card of transition. And the Tower card is another card of change. It can be considered transition or change. Of course, it's a more abrupt change, and it's about upheaval, and it's really recognizing that sometimes we have to let go of that which we have right now in order to allow some fairly significant changes to occur, because potentially we're at the stage where we actually need that. Perhaps small changes are not going to be, significant enough. And you'll see this in readings sometimes where the spread position, the card position, is how do I move forward, or what changes do I need to make? In what ways do I need to grow? And those kind of positions are really, if they show up with these transition cards that I'm going to show you, we know that it's extremely significant. The other thing I want to mention, and I'm not going to put them all out, but some transition cards that we, of course, know that are important are the tens. So the wheel, I showed you the wheel previously of the major, and the major wheel, which is number 10, translates out into the tens of the minor arcana and relates to that. So any 10 of the minor that's going to come up is going to show you that there's some type of transition, some type of cycle that's occurring. So probably an ending of one thing and moving on to another. The other thing that you want to remember is that for transition, we want to look at always aces, or new beginnings. So if you're in some type of change or transition, or how you move forward, maybe it's that you need to recognize that a new start is required for you. Pages as well can usually mean a new beginning, or some kind of new approach, learning something new, starting kind of from scratch in a way. And so those cards are important in any type of reading that's has a position around that theme. Also, alternatively, it may not be a position within an actual spread. It may be that they've pulled 2 or 3 of these cards, and they are extremely significant. Let me show you a couple of others. All right, so the Fool card in the Major Arcana, and I've also picked the Six of Swords, can also show some type of change or transition as well. So what changes do you need to make? How do I need to move forward? Those are really important cards that come up, because you can see that the Fool is saying, maybe you need to actually take a leap of faith. Maybe you need to start something fresh. Maybe some new, fresh energy of doing something that you haven't done before is required at this time in your life. Six of Swords is saying, you know what, you need to move through what it is that you're experiencing right now, because there is sort of a calmer situation ahead of you. Maybe you need to actually physically transition, and you need to actually move or change locations or travel in some way. So those are some of the cards I just wanted to talk about in terms of transition. And like I said, if a client pulled 2 or 3 of these, that would also be an extremely strong position and strong placement for these cards. So let's look at something else now. Okay, so let's look at a different area. So if we're doing a reading on relationships, which is often asked by a client, there are several cards in the tarot deck that really, speak very highly, or speak very clearly, should I say, of relationships. And some of the cards speak about relationships that actually have some strife or difficulty associated, such as the Three of Swords or the Five of Swords. But regardless, whether it be a card that is putting a very positive spin about relationships or it's showing a difficulty, if it's in the realm of relationships, it's a very, very strong placement in that reading. So some examples are the Two of Cups and the Lover's card. And then I've got a couple more behind here, the Ace of Cups and the Empress. You sometimes will see the Four of Wands as well come up. Three of Cups can really denote a lot of positive friendship situations. And like I said, some of the more difficult cards, Three of Swords, Five of Swords, anything that really shows some difficulty or strife can also be, very poignant and very important. There's some other cards as well that I just wanted to mention that can almost show the style of relationship. And so just hang on, and I'm going to put a couple of those up. All right, and here's a couple more. So I've pulled the Seven of Cups and the Knight of Cups. So Seven of Cups is kind of that card that often suggests that there's a lot of emotion, there's a lot of desire going on, but maybe one has a lot of choices, or one is not very clear on how they feel or what they want to do, and almost can feel like kind of delusions, like not really sure or not having the greatest clarity of the situation. So that can be a very idealistic sort of placement for relationships. Or it can mean that there's maybe a couple of people the person is interested in, and they've got a lot of choices, and so they're thinking about it. The Knight of Cups tends to be a very romantic placement, and certainly would really talk about the style of that relationship or something going on within the relationship. Here's a couple more. Ten of Cups certainly shows some, positivity and sort of a level of completion and some real success and happiness within relationship. And the Knight of Pentacles is a good one. This is an example of where Venus is involved in this card, and Venus is the planet that's all about connection and relationships and bringing people together, and it's about really what do I value and who do I value and what type of relationships I want. And the Nine of Pentacles is a very, obviously it's an earth card, and it's very practical, and certainly this individual has worked very hard. And it can be a key indicator that this is a relationship where the one or maybe both of the people are very independent and very self-sufficient, and they don't want the type of relationship where there's a lot of codependency going on. They want to be very independent, very self-sufficient. So that relationship, it would have a flavor of what type of relationship, but Venus is involved in that particular card. And I'll show you a couple more. Okay, so in addition to all of the cards I just showed you, which included the Empress, Nine of Pentacles, Two of Cups, Seven of Cups, Venus actually rules all of those cards. So isn't that interesting how Venus is the planet of relationships, and those are the cards that we often pull out and we can see, we'll speak about relationships. And here's a couple more. So Four of Wands, I mentioned it, but we didn't have it out. So Four of Wands is Venus and Aries. And Five of Swords, which is causing five, is always creating strife, and that's Venus and Aquarius, and that's difficulty with relationships. So, there's a lot of competition and strife and struggle between people in that one. So there's an example, I kind of worked that in, how, a planetary, attribution or an astrological attribution can come into play and really create a theme. All right, so let's look at one other thing. All right, so the last thing we're going to talk about today is some reversals. So there's various, theories about how you would interpret a meaning of a reversed card. I'm just going to actually keep it simple and give you today just some examples of some common meanings of some reversed cards, and we'll leave theory of how you want to interpret reverse cards to another day. So here's an example. Remember, I was talking about the challenges that someone may face, and if some of these cards come up and they're in the challenge position. Well, let's just say that these are reversed, and let's say they come up in a position of what is the solution, or what does the person need to learn, what is the best piece of advice, that sort of thing within a reading. So if these cards come up reversed, it's going to be an extremely strong position. So let's look at the first one. So if the Eight of Swords comes up reversed, I mean, the Eight of Swords upright, generally means that someone is kind of bound by a circumstance, or bound by their own perception or thinking of something, and that they need to really recognize that they can move outside of that, but they don't. So if it is reversed, it can mean that you're kind of breaking through, some of the constraints, whatever they may be, that are, imposed upon you, or that you've imposed upon yourself, or that the restrictions may be temporary and that you're kind of moving away from them. Another example is just that it can mean, freeing yourself from some of the limiting factors, from the past, or from whatever it is that you're thinking or perceiving. Okay, and likewise, the Devil card, and I've sort of paired them together because they're similar. Devil card, again, can mean sort of bondage from certain, things that are really not in our best interest and are not healthy for us. And that if it's reversed, it can mean that you sort of have a more growing awareness, that you're kind of in a state of bondage with something, and that you really are desiring and wanting to be free at this stage. So there's a couple of examples, if you reverse these cards, that if they sit in the position of even an outcome, or if they sit in a position of what do I need to learn, what is my challenge I need to overcome, that sort of thing. And then these are in this position, that's a very strong position, because it's showing the avenue that the individual can change or grow, or what they need to actually address. So watch for this type of thing when it's a reversal, and it's in a very strong position where the reverse meaning really makes a lot of sense for that position. It can be very strong. So let's look at a couple more. All right, so these are the last ones we're going to look at. And I just wanted to show you, we'd already looked, I think, at both of these cards previously. So if, for example, these cards come up, but they actually come up reversed, in a position, for example, of what are the obstacles an individual needs to look at, what are the challenges, or even what's my next step, and these come up and it's showing that there are difficulty with next steps, that's a very, very powerful placement, and we know that message is going to be very strong. So, for example, the Eight of Wands, we talked about it being upright, and that the Eight of Wands is really that card that wants to move ahead and has aims and goals, and really has energy to move ahead and wants to do so quite quickly with great projection and aim towards something. But if it's reversed, really it's got issues in terms of being able to move ahead, because there could be some obstacles, there could be delays, there could be difficulties in actually moving forward. Likewise, the Six of Swords, usually it's about transition and moving ahead and moving past whatever it is that we're where we are now, in order to get to a more calm and happier place. And the Six of Swords reversed is saying that there's going to be delays in trying to move ahead, there's delays in leaving the past behind, and there's delays in actually, whether it be physically or psychologically, moving forward. So there's a couple more examples. So if those end up in a position that's really showing the person, what are your obstacles, or what's your next step, and it's a clear situation where there's an obstacle, or it's a clear situation that there's going to be a delay, that's a very powerful placement. So I hope this has helped. I know it's a little longer. I just wanted to give you a really good viewpoint of how the cards can be in their greatest, and strongest positions if they're in a certain placement within the reading. Now, I know that it relates to what the other cards are around, but we have to start somewhere. So we're going to start here, and then, I hope that this helps you with your readings moving forward. So thank you so much for listening, and we'll talk to you soon for lesson number 4 next time. Take care from Tarot Living.